The year was 2347, and Danny Cole was tired after a long day of hauling cargo across the dusty plains of Kepler 9b, a frontier mining colony far from Earth where humans had come seeking fortune and new beginnings in the stars. Wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked up at the orange sky, wondering if he would ever save enough money to return home to see his mother again, when suddenly a bright streak of fire cut across the heavens and crashed into the rocky wastelands. Beyond the colony walls, Danny stood frozen for a moment, watching smoke rise from the crash site about 2 miles away. And even though colony protocol clearly stated that all crashes should be reported to security first, something deep inside him told him he needed to get there before anyone else did. He jumped into his old transport vehicle and drove as fast as the rusted machine would allow, bouncing over rocks and through shallow craters, until he reached the burning wreckage of what looked like a small escape pod. The metal was twisted and scorched black, and flames licked at the strange alien symbols carved into its surface. Symbols Danny had never seen in all his years working alongside dozens of different alien species in the colony. He should have waited for help. He knew that, but a soft sound reached his ears through the crackling of the fire. A sound like a baby bird crying for its mother. And Danny could not ignore it. Wrapped his jacket around his hands and pulled apart the broken hull, feeling the heat bite at his skin as he searched through the debris for the source of that desperate little cry. And then he found it nestled in a small compartment, lined with what looked like silver feathers. Was a creature no bigger than his palm. A tiny dragon with shimmering scales that caught the firelight and reflected it back in 1,000 different colors. The creature looked up at him with golden eyes that seemed far too intelligent for something so small. And it made that chirping sound again, a sound full of fear and pain and hope all mixed together. Danny carefully lifted the tiny dragon from its nest, cradling it against his chest, where it immediately pressed itself close to his heartbeat, its small body trembling, but its cries finally stopping. One of its delicate wings was bent at a wrong angle, and there was a small cut on its side, but it was alive. And Danny felt a strange warmth spread through his chest as the creature looked up at him with complete trust. The sound of vehicles approaching made Danny turn, and he saw the security transports racing toward the crash site with their lights flashing and their sirens. Whaling Commander Leo Grant was the first to step out, a tall man with a stern face and cold eyes who had never liked Danny much, since Danny had a habit of ignoring rules that he thought were stupid. "What do you have there, Cole?" the commander demanded, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip as he walked toward Danny with slow, deliberate steps. "I found it in the wreckage," Danny replied, instinctively holding the tiny dragon closer to his chest. "It is just a baby, Commander. It is hurt and scared." "Hand it over," Grant ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "That creature is now property of the colony administration until we determine what it is and where it came from." Danny was about to comply, even though every part of him screamed against it, when he noticed movement on the hills surrounding the crash site. Figures in dark armor were advancing toward them, at least 20 of them, carrying weapons that hummed with deadly energy. "And they were not colony security. Who are they?" Danny asked, backing away slowly as the commander turned to look. The answer came in the form of weapons fire. The dark-armored soldiers opened fire without any warning or any demand for surrender, their plasma bolts cutting through the air and striking 2 of the security officers. Before anyone could react, Danny did not think about what he did next. He simply did it, turned his back to the attackers, and curled his body around the tiny dragon, shielding it completely as he waited for the burning pain of plasma fire to tear through him. The bolts struck his back, one after another, and Danny screamed, but the scream was not from pain, it was from shock. Because instead of burning through his flesh, the bolts seemed to splash against his skin like water hitting stone. He looked down at his arms and watched in amazement as his skin rippled and changed. taking on a dark silver color that spread across his body like liquid metal, forming patterns that looked almost like scales. The tiny dragon chirped loudly and pressed its head against Danny's chest, its golden eyes glowing brighter than before. And Danny understood somehow that the creature was doing this, was giving him this gift to protect them both. More plasma fire struck him and bounced away harmlessly, the transformed skin absorbing the impacts without any damage at all. Commander Grant was shouting orders and returning fire at the attackers. And in the chaos, Danny saw his chance. He ran. His legs carried him faster than they ever had before, each stride covering more ground than should have been possible. And within seconds, he had reached the entrance to the old mining tunnels that ran beneath the colony. He plunged into the darkness without hesitation, the tiny dragon still clutched safely against his chest, its soft chirping sounds guiding him deeper into the tunnels, like it knew exactly where they needed to go. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of battle fading, replaced by the echo of his own footsteps and the rapid beating of his heart. Danny finally stopped in a large cavern lit by glowing minerals in the walls, and he sat down on a rock to catch his breath and examine what had happened to him. His arms were still covered in that silver-scaled skin, and when he touched it, he could feel that it was harder than any armor he had ever worn. Yet it moved with his muscles as naturally as his own flesh. The tiny dragon crawled up to his shoulder and rubbed its small head against his cheek, making a sound that was almost like purring. And Danny could not help but smile despite everything. "Why, you little one?" he whispered, and the creature looked at him with those golden eyes that held secrets older than humanity itself. He did not know what he had gotten himself into, but he knew one thing for certain: he would protect this tiny dragon no matter what it cost him, because that was simply what humans did when something small and innocent needed them. And somewhere deep inside him, in a place where his humanity was already beginning to change, Danny Cole felt that this was only the beginning of something that would transform not just his body, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be alive. Danny had been hiding in the abandoned mining tunnels for several hours when he heard footsteps approaching from one of the side passages, and he pressed himself against the cold stone wall with the tiny dragon tucked safely inside his jacket. His transformed skin had not returned to normal, and in the dim light of the glowing minerals, he could see that the silver scales now covered most of his arms and had started spreading across his chest. Footsteps grew closer, and Danny prepared to run again. But then a familiar voice called out through the darkness. "Danny, I know you are here. My scanner is tracking your biosignature and is showing some very strange readings that I need to understand." It was Katie Lane, the xenobiologist who worked at the Colony Research Center, a woman Danny had spoken to many times when he delivered supplies to her laboratory. He stepped out from his hiding place, and Katie gasped when she saw him, her eyes widening as she took in the silver scales that covered his skin. "What happened to you?" she asked, moving closer with her scanner raised, the device beeping rapidly as it tried to make sense of the readings. "I do not fully understand it myself," Danny admitted, opening his jacket to reveal the tiny dragon curled up against his chest. "But I think it has something to do with this little creature." Katie's reaction was not what Danny expected, because instead of fear or confusion, her face showed pure amazement and wonder as she stared at the tiny dragon with tears forming in her eyes. "That is impossible," she whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers to touch the creature's silver scales. "This is a Valkorian ember drake, but they have been extinct for 10,000 years. Every scientist in the galaxy believed they were gone forever." The tiny dragon allowed Katie to touch it, chirping softly as if it understood that she meant no harm. "What do you know about them?" Danny asked, desperate for any information that might help him understand what was happening to his body. Katie led him deeper into the tunnels as she explained, walking quickly while checking her scanner for any signs of pursuit. The Valkyrians were an ancient race that existed long before humans ever left Earth, she said, her voice filled with the excitement of a scientist discovering something wonderful. They created the Ember Drakes as companion creatures, and when a drake bonded with a partner, it would share its abilities with them through a process that changed both beings at a fundamental level. Changed how? Danny asked, looking down at his scaled arms. The bond transforms the partner into something more than they were before. Katie continued. Enhanced strength, incredible durability, heightened senses, and abilities that would seem like magic to anyone who did not understand the science behind them. Danny processed this information as they walked, and the tiny dragon seemed to sense his emotional state because it pressed closer to him and made comforting sounds. Those soldiers who attacked us, Danny said, remembering the dark armored figures on the hills. Who were they, and why did they want this creature? Before Katie could answer, another voice spoke from the shadows ahead of them. They are syndicate hunters, and they want the drake because its genetic material is worth more than this entire colony. A woman stepped into the light, tall and lean with short dark hair and eyes that had seen too much violence, and Danny recognized her as Megan Ross, a smuggler who operated in the underground markets of the colony. How did you find us? Katie demanded, positioning herself between Megan and Danny. I know every tunnel and every hidden passage in this colony, Megan replied with a slight smile. When I heard that some fool had stolen a priceless alien creature and developed scale armor on his skin, I knew I had to see it for myself. Danny did not trust her, but he needed information. So he asked about the Syndicate. Megan explained that the Syndicate was a ruthless, criminal organization that operated across dozens of star systems, dealing in weapons and slaves and anything else that could make them wealthy. And their leader in this sector was a man called Captain Victor Holt. Holt is a collector of rare species, Megan said, her voice carrying a hint of old anger. He captures them, studies them, and then sells their genetic material to the highest bidder. And an Ember Drake would be the greatest prize he has ever found. As if to confirm her words, the distant sound of boots echoed through the tunnels, along with the electronic chirping of scanning equipment. They are using thermal sensors, Katie said, checking her own device. They will find us within minutes. Danny felt something stir inside him, a new sense that had not existed before the transformation began. And he could feel the hunters approaching through the stone itself, their footsteps sending vibrations that his enhanced body could now detect. There are 12 of them coming from the east tunnel, he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. And 8 more circling around from the west. Megan raised an eyebrow at this display, clearly impressed. If you can sense them that well, then maybe we have a chance, she said. I know a passage that leads to an old research station, somewhere they will not think to look. But we need to move now. They ran through the tunnels with Megan leading the way, taking turns that seemed random, but always kept them one step ahead of the pursuing hunters. At one point, the Syndicate soldiers caught up to them in a wide chamber, and Danny had no choice but to fight. He discovered that his transformed body could withstand plasma fire just as easily as the bullets from before, the energy bolts splashing harmlessly against his silver scales while he knocked the soldiers aside with strength he had never possessed. The tiny dragon, who Danny had started calling Spark in his mind, breathed a small jet of blue flame that sealed a tunnel behind them, cutting off pursuit and giving them the time they needed to escape. When they finally reached the hidden research station, Danny collapsed against a wall, exhausted but unharmed. Katie knelt beside him and examined his transformation with her scanner, and her face grew serious as she read the results. The bond is still progressing, she said quietly. Your body is continuing to change, Danny, and I do not think there is any way to stop it now. Danny looked at Spark, who had crawled onto his knee and was looking up at him with those golden eyes full of trust and affection. "What will I become?" He asked. Katie hesitated before answering. "Something new," she finally said. "Something that has not existed for 10,000 years. Spark chirped and nuzzled against Danny's transformed hand. And despite everything, Danny found himself smiling at the tiny creature who had changed his life forever. The hidden research station was old and covered in dust, but the lights still worked and the air recyclers hummed quietly in the walls, keeping the space livable even after years of abandonment. Danny sat on a metal crate while Katie continued to study his transformation, and Spark had fallen asleep on his shoulder. The tiny dragon's breath warm against his neck. Megan was checking the station's security systems when a door at the far end of the room opened and a figure stepped through that made everyone freeze in shock. It was an alien, but not like any alien Danny had ever seen in the colony, because this being had scales similar to Spark's covering its entire body, though they were faded and dull with age, and its eyes held the same golden light that shone in the tiny dragon's gaze. "A Valkorian," Katie breathed, her scientific excitement momentarily overcoming her surprise. "I thought your species was extinct along with the ember drakes." The alien moved slowly into the room, leaning on a staff carved from some kind of crystal, and when it spoke, its voice was soft and tired like wind passing through ancient ruins. "I am Elder Zin, the last of my kind," the Valkorian said. "I have been hiding among the colonists for 30 years, waiting for this day, hoping that somehow one of the eggs we scattered across the galaxy would finally hatch." Elder Zin approached Danny and Spark, with tears forming in those golden eyes, and the ancient alien reached out with trembling fingers to touch the sleeping dragon. "She chose you," Zin said, looking at Danny with an expression of profound gratitude. "When you protected her from those who would do her harm, she recognized the purity of your heart and chose you as her bonded partner." "She?" Danny asked, looking at the tiny dragon with new eyes. "Her name in our language means Spark of Hope," Elder Zin replied. "And she is the last of the Ember Drakes, the final hope for a bond that once connected two species across the stars." Danny had so many questions that he did not know where to begin. So Elder Zin guided him to a chair and began to explain everything. Valkyrians had created the Ember Drakes thousands of years ago, not as pets or servants, but as true partners who shared their lives and their abilities with beings worthy of the bond. When the Syndicate's ancestors discovered the value of Drake genetic material, they hunted both species nearly to extinction, and the few surviving Valkorians scattered the remaining Drake eggs across the galaxy in desperate hope that someday they might find worthy partners. "The bond is changing you," Elder Zin said, examining Danny's silver-scaled skin with knowing eyes. "And it will continue to change you until you are something between human and Valkorian, a being we called a bridge in the old days." Danny felt fear grip his heart at these words. "Will I still be human?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You will still be you," Elder Zin assured him. "Your memories, your personality, your soul. These things will not change, but your body will become something new, something capable of wonders you cannot yet imagine." Spark woke up at that moment and chirped softly, looking at Danny with those intelligent golden eyes. And Danny could feel her emotions through their bond, her fear that he might reject her, her hope that he would accept what they could become together. "What happens if I reject the bond?" Danny asked, even though part of him already knew the answer. Elder Zin's face fell into sadness. "Spark would die," the ancient Valkorian said simply. "An Ember Drake cannot survive without its bonded partner, and she has already given too much of herself to you. If you reject her, now she will fade away within days." Danny looked at the tiny dragon on his shoulder, this small creature who had trusted him completely from the moment he found her in that burning wreckage, and he knew that he could never let her die, but accepting the bond meant giving up his humanity, becoming something that no human had ever been before. And that terrified him more than any syndicate soldier ever could. The decision was taken from his hands when Megan suddenly shouted a warning from across the room. "We have a problem," the smuggler said, pointing to a communication screen she had activated. A big problem. The screen showed a woman's face, someone Danny recognized as Sophie Clark, a communications officer from the colony who had always been kind to him when he delivered her supplies. "This is an emergency broadcast to all colony personnel," Sophie said, her voice tight with fear. "A syndicate fleet has entered orbit and is demanding that we surrender the creature and the human who took it. If we do not comply within 6 hours, they will begin orbital bombardment of the colony." Danny's blood ran cold as he processed what he was hearing. The syndicate was willing to destroy an entire colony, to kill thousands of innocent people, just to get their hands on Spark. "This is my fault," Danny said, guilt crushing down on him. "If I had just handed her over, none of this would have happened, and she would be dead or worse," Katie said firmly, gripping his arm. "You did the right thing, Danny. You protected an innocent creature when everyone else wanted to use her." Elder Zinn stepped forward and placed a weathered hand on Danny's shoulder. "The choice before you is not about humanity or transformation," the ancient Valkyrian said. "It is about what you are willing to sacrifice to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Danny closed his eyes and felt Spark's emotions through their bond. Felt her willingness to die rather than let innocent people suffer because of her. And he loved her for that courage, even as he refused to let it happen. He opened his eyes and looked at Elder Zinn with new determination. "Tell me how to complete the bond," Danny said. "Tell me how to become strong enough to fight them." Elder Zinn smiled through his tears and nodded. "Then let us begin." As Danny prepared to embrace his transformation fully, to become something new in order to protect both Spark and the colony, he felt his fear dissolve into purpose. He was still terrified of what he would become, but he was more terrified of a universe where innocent creatures like Spark were hunted too. Extinction and entire colonies were destroyed by those who valued profit over life. If becoming a bridge was the price of stopping that, then Danny Cole was ready to pay it, and somewhere deep in his changing body, he felt wings beginning to form beneath his skin. The transformation was painful in ways that Danny could not have imagined. As Elder Zinn guided him through the ancient ritual that would complete his bond with Spark and unlock the full potential they shared, silver scales spread across his entire body, and he felt his bones shift and change, growing stronger and lighter at the same time, while muscles he never knew he had formed beneath his transformed skin. But the most dramatic change came when wings erupted from his back, tearing through his shirt and unfurling into the air like sails made of silver and gold. Each one spanning nearly 10 feet from tip to base. Spark had grown too during the ritual, now the size of a small cat rather than fitting in Danny's palm, and her scales glowed with inner fire as she circled around him with joyful chirps. "You are ready," Elder Zinn said, exhaustion clear in the old Valkyrian's voice. "You are the first bridge in 10,000 years, Danny Cole, and you carry the hope of 2 species on your shoulders." Danny flexed his new wings experimentally and felt power coursing through every part of his transformed body. Power that he would use to protect the innocent rather than to conquer or destroy. Katie approached him with wonder in her eyes, reaching out to touch one of his wings with gentle fingers. "You are beautiful," she said softly. And Danny felt heat rise to his cheeks. Despite everything, the moment was interrupted by Commander Leo Grant's voice crackling through the station's communication system. "This is Commander Grant calling anyone who can hear me. The Syndicate has begun dropping troops into the colony. We need every able fighter to help defend the civilian shelters. Please respond." Danny exchanged looks with the others and made his decision without hesitation. "Megan." "Get Elders in and Katie somewhere safe," he ordered, surprised by the authority in his own voice. "I am going up there." "You cannot fight a whole fleet by yourself," Katie protested, grabbing his arm. "Watch me," Danny replied. And before anyone could stop him, he launched himself through a ventilation shaft that led to the surface. His wings carrying him upward at incredible speed, burst out of the ground near the colony walls, and immediately saw the chaos that the Syndicate attack had caused. With buildings burning and civilians running for shelter while security forces tried to hold back soldiers in dark armor, Danny did not waste time with words or warnings. He simply dove into the battle. His transformed body was nearly invincible against the plasma weapons the Syndicate soldiers carried, and his strength allowed him to throw grown men through the air like they weighed nothing at all. Spark flew beside him, breathing jets of blue fire that scattered enemy formations and set their equipment ablaze. And together, they cut through the Syndicate forces like a storm through dry leaves. "Commander," Grant stared in disbelief when Danny landed beside him, wings folding against his back as he surveyed the battlefield. "Cole?" the commander asked, his voice uncertain. "Is that really you?" "It is me," Danny confirmed, "and I am here to help. If you will let me." Grant looked at the Syndicate soldiers retreating from Danny's position, then at the dropships descending from the sky with reinforcements. And he made the practical choice. "Welcome to the Defense Force," the commander said. "Now help me save my colony." Danny nodded and took to the sky again, soaring toward the descending dropships with Spark right behind him. He discovered that his transformation had given him more abilities than just wings and armor, because when he focused his energy, he could generate intense heat that radiated from his hands and his breath. The first dropship never saw him coming, and Danny tore through its hull with superheated claws before the pilot could even react. He moved from ship to ship, destroying their engines and forcing them to crash land away from civilian areas, while Spark targeted the soldiers who tried to parachute to safety, driving them back with walls of flame. But then a new ship appeared, larger and more heavily armed than the dropships, and Danny recognized the personal vessel of Captain Victor Holt from the Syndicate markings on its hull. "So you are the human who bonded with my prize," Holt's voice boomed from the ship's speakers. "I must admit I am impressed, but you are still just one creature against the might of the Syndicate." The ship opened fire with weapons far more powerful than anything the ground troops carried, and Danny had to dive and weave through the air to avoid being hit. Spark stayed close to him, and through their bond, Danny could feel her determination matching his own. Her refusal to let the monsters who had hunted her kind win this battle. They fought Victor Holt's ship across the sky above the colony, trading blows and dodging attacks, until finally Danny saw an opening and dove straight at the ship's main engine. He punched through the armor plating with his superheated fists and tore the engine apart from the inside, sending the vessel spiraling toward the ground. But as he pulled away from the damaged ship, a final desperate shot from one of its weapons struck Spark directly in the chest. Danny felt the pain through their bond like a knife in his own heart, and he screamed as he watched Spark fall from the sky with smoke trailing from her wounded body. He caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her small form against his chest as rage and grief threatened to overwhelm him. Through their connection, he could feel her life fading, could feel her trying to tell him that it was all right, that protecting the colony was worth this sacrifice. But Danny refused to accept it. Something inside him broke open, a final barrier between his human nature and the power of the bond. And his transformation accelerated in its ultimate form. His silver scales turned to gold. His wings doubled in size, and flames erupted around his body without burning him. A corona of fire that announced the birth of something that had not existed for 10 millennia. A true Dragon Knight. Danny rose into the air with Spark still cradled in his arms, and he turned his fury on the Syndicate fleet that hung in orbit above the colony. He could feel them up there, could sense their weapons charging from the bombardment they had threatened, and he knew that he had the power to stop them with a roar that echoed across the entire colony. Danny launched himself into the sky, breaking through the atmosphere with speed that should have been impossible. Carrying Spark toward the stars, the Syndicate fleet never stood a chance. Danny tore through their ships like they were made of paper, his golden flames melting their weapons and his armored body shrugging off everything they threw at him. And within minutes, the fleet was retreating into hyperspace with Captain Holt screaming orders that no one was left to follow when it was over. Danny descended back to the colony with Spark still motionless in his arms. Her breathing shallow and her light fading, he had won the battle. But he was terrified that he had lost the one thing that mattered most. Danny burst through the doors at the Colony Medical Center with Spark cradled against his chest, his golden scales still glowing with residual heat from the battle, and his massive wings folded tight. Against his back, Katie and Elder Zinn were already there waiting for him, having watched the battle from the hidden research station's monitors. And they immediately took Spark from his arms and placed her on a medical bed. "She is still alive," Katie said, her hands moving quickly over the scanning equipment, but just barely. The plasma bolt damaged her heart, and she is losing energy faster than her body can regenerate. Elder Zinn placed his weathered hands on Spark's small form and closed his golden eyes in concentration. "The bond can save her," the ancient Valkorian said, "if Danny is willing to share his own life force with her. But it will weaken him significantly, and there is risk involved." Danny did not hesitate for even a second. "Tell me what to do," he said. Elder Zinn guided Danny to place his transformed hands on Spark's chest, and then instructed him to open the bond between them completely, to let his energy flow into her without any barriers or restrictions. It felt like having part of his soul pulled out through his fingertips, a draining sensation that made his vision blur and his legs shake. But Danny refused to stop, even when Katie begged him to take a break. Minutes passed that felt like hours, and slowly Danny began to see color returning to Spark's scales, saw her breathing grow stronger and more steady, felt her presence in his mind growing brighter instead of fading away. Finally, Elder Zinn told him to stop, and Danny collapsed into a chair beside the medical bed, exhausted beyond anything he had ever experienced, but filled with hope. Spark's eyes fluttered open, those beautiful golden eyes that Danny had fallen in love with from the first moment he saw them in that burning wreckage. And she let out a weak chirp that was the most wonderful sound he had ever heard. "Welcome back, little one," Danny whispered, reaching out to stroke her head with fingers that trembled from exhaustion. Spark pressed her head against his palm and purred. And through their bond, Danny felt her gratitude and her love washing over him like warm sunlight. The colonists began arriving at the medical center over the next few hours, wanting to see the human who had transformed into something impossible and single-handedly defeated an entire Syndicate fleet. Commander Grant was among them, and the stern man who had once demanded Danny hand over the tiny dragon now approached with something like respect in his eyes. "You saved us all," the commander said, extending his hand to Danny. "I was wrong about you, Cole. And I was wrong about that creature. Can you forgive an old soldier for his mistakes?" Danny shook his hand and nodded. "We are all just trying to survive out here," Danny replied. "And sometimes we make choices we regret. What matters is what we do after we realize we were wrong." Over the following days, Danny's body stabilized into its final form, and he discovered that he could shift between his human appearance and his transformed state at will, though his eyes always retained a faint golden glow that marked him as something more than ordinary. Spark recovered fully and had grown to the size of a large dog, her silver scales now streaked with gold that matched Danny's transformed state, and she rarely left his side for more than a few minutes at a time. Elder Zinn declared that Danny was now a true bridge, the first in 10,000 years. a living connection between humanity and the ancient Valkorian heritage that had almost been lost forever. What will you do now? Katie asked him one evening as they stood on the colony walls watching the sun set over the rocky plains. Danny considered the question carefully before answering. "The Syndicate will be back," he said. "They know what spark is and they will not give up easily. And there might be other Emberdrake eggs out there somewhere, waiting to be found by people who would use them for evil. So you are going to search for them?" Katie asked. "Someone has to protect them," Danny replied, looking at Spark, who was perched on his shoulder. "Someone has to make sure that what almost happened to Spark never happens to another innocent creature." Commander Grant offered Danny an official position as the colony's protector, which he accepted, but everyone knew that his mission would eventually take him beyond the borders of Kepler 9b. Man Ross decided to stay as well, claiming that life had become much more interesting since Danny's transformation. And she began using her smuggler contacts to gather information about Syndicate movements across the sector. Sophie Clark, who had broadcast the warning that had given Danny time to prepare for the battle, sent a new transmission across all communication channels, telling the galaxy what had happened on Kepler 9b. She told the story of a human cargo hauler who had risked everything to protect a tiny dragon, and how that act of compassion had transformed him into something wonderful and terrible, and knew the transmission reached 1,000 worlds and sparked conversations that would continue for generations. Conversations about humanity's place in the galaxy and about the power of protecting the innocent. Elder Zinn passed away peacefully a few weeks later, content in the knowledge that his people's legacy would continue through Danny and Spark. And the colonists built a memorial for the last Valkorian that stood in the center of the colony on the night before he planned to begin his first mission to search for other Emberdrake eggs. Danny stood on the highest tower in the colony with Spark beside him, both of them looking up at the stars. Katie joined them, and she took Danny's hand in hers without saying anything, and he was grateful for her quiet presence. "Are you ready for this?" she finally asked. Danny thought about everything that had happened since he found Spark in that burning wreckage, about how his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined, and about the person he had become through that journey. "No," he admitted with a small smile, "but I do not think anyone is ever really ready for the things that matter most. You just do them anyway, because they need to be done." Spark chirped in agreement and spread her wings, which now spanned nearly as wide as Danny's own. "Then let us begin," Katie said. Danny transformed into his golden-scaled form, his wings unfurling in the cool night air, and he lifted off from the tower with Spark flying beside him and Katie waving from below. He did not know what challenges awaited him among the stars, what enemies he would face, or what wonders he would discover. But he knew that he would never stop protecting those who could not protect themselves, because that was what it meant to be human, even when you had become something more. And as Danny Cole soared into the darkness with his bonded dragon at his side, he understood at last that his transformation had not taken his humanity away. It had shown him what humanity could truly become when it chose compassion over fear and protection. Overpower. The stars stretched out before him like an infinite road of light, and somewhere among them other Emberdrakes were waiting to be found, and Danny would find them, one by one, no matter how long it took, because hope, once kindled, could never truly be extinguished.